Grandma gifted me her $1,900,000 mountain retreat. The very parents who ditched me at 19 strutted into the will reading like executives, boasting. We'll turn it into a family venture. Then the judge revealed the last clause. Sharp gasps, stunned silence, and their smiles shut off like a flip switch. Can you imagine watching your own family, people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, stand there like vultures, ready to dismantle a legacy, a home, right before your eyes? That was my reality, the day Grandma Vivian's will became a battleground, and I found myself staring down a betrayal I never saw coming. I'm Liam, I'm 28 now, and the air that day was thick with something I hadn't smelled in years, a mix of pine sap and wood smoke. It clung to my parents, Robert and Eleanor, as they strode into that polished conference room. They hadn't chosen to see me in years, but here they were, shaking hands like champions at a finish line they already believed was theirs. That scent, the very essence of the lodge, used to mean warm cocoa, chess games by the fire. Now it was just a phantom memory, mocking the cold reality. They didn't sit with me. They stood behind the gleaming leather chairs, exchanging stiff, businesslike grins. My dad, Robert, had that cool, careful smile he probably practiced in a mirror. My mom, Eleanor, gave me a glance so quick, so flat, it felt like a checkbox being ticked. Present, acknowledged, dismissed. Between them sat my older sister, Clara, silver watch glinting, crisp ponytail, already flipping through a legal pad like she was prepping for a quarterly review. They'd already decided what this day meant. I never thought I'd be the type to remember the exact way sunlight streaks across a floor during the worst moments of my life, but I do. That conference room window framed a slice of mountains, a living painting. September air drifted in from the lodge's ridge, carrying tiny motes of dust that danced in the light, breaking against Mr. Albright's briefcase. The lodge itself sat about an hour out of town, 3 stories of cedar, hand-carved railings, creaking steps that hummed at night. I always believed it had a pulse. If the realtor said it was worth $1.9 million, that number was just the outer skin. Inside, it was birthday cakes and heavy quilts, Grandma Vivian humming old country lullabies, and the way she could read a room before anyone else even realized there was a room to read. And now, I was supposed to sit there quietly while people who hadn't spoken to her in years decided how to tear it apart. If this all sounds melodramatic, I promise you it wasn't. It was slow. It was the particular, bone-chilling quiet of winter arriving too early. The last time I'd truly seen my parents, I was 19. I was still hauling boxes out of a dorm room that wasn't mine anymore because I'd chosen the wrong major, the wrong job, the wrong sense of loyalty. They told me, with that clipped patience reserved for children who've upset a table of crystal glasses, that I was making everyone's life harder. I should move out. Be realistic. They didn't say I was a screw-up, but they used synonyms. Independent, adult consequences. I slept in my car for 2 weeks, learned the mountain roads by heart, just so I could make it to Grandma Vivian's on weekends. I'd claim I was there to work on the firewood stack, just to have a reason to stay. She'd make eggs with too much butter and tell me about stubborn trees that bend in windstorms and survived. We never really talked about my parents. Not really. She had a way of making you feel like your decisions weren't the end of the world, just paragraphs in a book with a lot of pages left to write. I built a life that didn't need their validation. I got a job at a small trail outfitter, the kind of place that smells of canvas and good soap. I learned every boot they sold, every seam in every pack. I walked people through day hikes, overnight trips, searches for the perfect sock. It wasn't glamorous. It certainly wasn't the life my family bragged about at holiday parties. But at the end of the day, I owned myself. I still drove to the lodge twice a month, kept the gutters clear, sanded a loose step, and when the snow came, I'd clip the old-fashioned snowshoes to the porch rail like ornaments waiting for feet. As Grandma Vivian's hands grew unsteady, I stopped pretending I was only there for chores and started bringing her soup, reading to her from the local paper. She'd listen, eyes closed, then ask in that quiet way she had, "Liam, do you know what you're worth?" I always thought she meant my hourly wage. She meant something else entirely. The lawyer, Mr. Albright, looked like a Mr. Albright, born wearing a tie. He asked us to sit. My parents finally acknowledged me with the smallest flinch as I pulled my chair forward. The leather stuck to my shirt through a patch of sweat between my shoulder blades. Clara took the seat directly next to Mr. Albright, which would have been funny if I wasn't already so tired. Polished nails, pen ready, everything in neat, controllable lines. She'd been their star since we were kids. The scholarships, the promotions, the unspoken contract that she would never make choices that made them look bad at dinner. I think the first time I understood I was an idea, not a son, was when my father told me after a Little League game, "We will always support you, so long as you honor our family." I had struck out twice. Maybe honor begins with baseballs. Maybe it ends with property. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Mrs. Vivian Novak," Mr. Albright began. He explained the formalities, witness signatures, copies, sealed envelope. My mom touched my dad's hand, a smile smoothed by teeth whitening. He didn't look at me. I could hear my own swallow in the pause after the lawyer's sentence. That little click, louder because it's your own body reminding you that you exist. "I have to say," Clara whispered, leaning toward my mother, not bothering to lower her voice enough, "turning it into a destination brand is the only thing that makes sense. All that wasted equity." I watched her eyes move as if she were already a co-owner, scanning a blueprint. Knock out a wall, add a deck, replace quilts with industrial throws that could survive a spill in a Yelp photo. My parents had been smiling since they walked in, but the word brand sharpened my father's jawline into something triumphant. He'd always wanted to talk like that. His dream vocabulary: assets, optimization, yield. Mr. Albright listed the small things first. Jewelry to 3 nieces, her silver hairbrush set to an old friend, 2 quilts to a neighbor who always shoveled the porch steps after storms. I felt my throat tighten. The quilts had names, she used to tell me. Bear Path, Carpenter's Wheel, Star Mountain. The room's light shifted as a cloud moved outside, and for a moment, the mountains in the window looked closer, darkened into a single shoulder running toward us. "And now," Mr. Albright said, turning a page with care, "to the real property located at 7 Ridge Road, known to you perhaps as the Novak Mountain Lodge." I couldn't help it. I straightened. My mother dragged her chair a fraction of an inch forward, as if to meet a finishing tape. "My lodge," Grandma Vivian had always said, "belongs to the person who loves it enough to defend it." She had never told me what that meant. She had never said you. She had only asked if I knew what I was worth. Mr. Albright read, clear and even, "I hereby devise and bequeath the Novak Mountain Lodge, including all fixtures, land, and appurtenances, appraised at $1,900,000, to my grandson, Liam James Novak, in fee simple, together with the 4 rental cabins marked on the attached survey. This bequest is made with full knowledge and intent, and supersedes all prior instruments." My father's smile froze from the outside in. My mother's fingers, still on his hand, went rigid. Clara's pen stopped mid-scratch, so suddenly it squeaked. I didn't breathe for a second. Even when you allow yourself to imagine something, the real moment feels like you've stepped off a curb you misjudged. Nothing underfoot for half a beat, then a jolt. I forced air out of my chest with a short exhale that probably sounded like a laugh. I wasn't laughing. I was remembering my grandmother's last week. The way she asked me to bring the green tin from her bedroom closet and told me to check that the cedar blocks hadn't gone dry. She had looked past me then, toward a window where it was raining, and said, "Liam, some people think love is proven by who arrives when the table is set. Sometimes love is proven by who shows up with firewood when the stove goes out." I had joked, "Are you telling me to become a lumberjack?" She had squeezed my hand, her eyes glossy but steady. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. "There are, however, conditions." The word dropped like a stone into a still lake. My parents' smiles returned, brittle, but showing. "Of course," my father said. "As a family, we're prepared to. It goes to Liam outright." Clara cut in, nodding to me without looking at me. "But he'll need guidance. He's inexperienced." She offered Mr. Albright a professional, sympathetic nod. "We're here to help. We can turn this into a real operation." "Miss Sterling," Mr. Albright said politely, "if I might finish." He didn't wait for her answer. "The first clause is a no-sale provision. The lodge cannot be sold for a period of 7 years. The second identifies a land trust as a remainder beneficiary in the event of a sale or contest within that period. The third clause names a management successor in case of incapacity, which is unusual but lawful. The fourth clause is quite specific. He looked at me. He looked at my parents. Then he looked down at the page, as if he were bracing himself. It concerns access and residency. I could feel my heart picking up speed. The window light dimmed again as another cloud slid over the sun. I know it sounds odd, but even the wood grain in the table seemed to lift and tense. Mr. Albright read, "Owing to past conduct and my personal knowledge of their intentions regarding my property, I expressly forbid my son, Robert Sterling, and my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, and any entity controlled by them, from residing at, operating, managing, leasing, or otherwise benefiting from the lodge or associated cabins, directly or indirectly, for the period of the no-sale clause. Any violation shall be grounds for immediate injunctive relief and liquidated damages as outlined in Attachment C. They are permitted to visit as guests only with my grandson's written consent." The quiet that followed wasn't silent. It was crowded. The mountain wind moved. The furnace ticked. And somewhere down the hall, a printer warmed up. My mother's hand withdrew from my father's as if burned. Clara turned to stare at me for the first time. "She can't do that," my father said, but not to anyone in particular. He said it to the air. "She can't." "She did," Mr. Albright replied gently. "We reviewed this with her at length. She was very clear. It's enforceable." My mother sat straighter, smoothing the edge of a folder. "This is obviously a misunderstanding. Vivian loved family. She wanted this for the family. The memory that appeared in my mind then wasn't a holiday or a cake. It was my grandmother standing under the porch light last winter, telling me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a forest is keep out those who only see trees as boards." I had not understood it needed to be said this directly. Clara leaned forward, recovering her composure. "All right," she said briskly. "If the lodge cannot be sold for 7 years, we can still develop sweat equity. We can lease services to it. We can leverage the brand and the clause prohibits indirect benefit," Mr. Albright said. "No management fees, no third-party leases to entities you control." She anticipated that model. Clara's voice softened, the way people soften it when they think charm will carry the day. "Mr. Albright, with respect, Liam can't do this alone. He hasn't run a property. He hasn't even— I can speak for myself," I said, surprised at my own tone, which came out steady. I've been managing it with her for the last year. It wasn't the full truth. I'd done more than that. Put together a calendar for the cabins, updated the website a friendly neighbor had built in 2009, reshot photos after snowstorms, and coordinated the roofers who fixed the leak above room 7. But it felt too much like bragging to list it all. My stomach hurt with the kind of churning that mixes fear and relief. My father's mouth twitched. "You should have told us," he said. "You should have looped us in. This is exactly what happens when you make unilateral decisions, Liam. You embarrass people." The word hit the room with such familiarity that I suddenly felt 19 again, carrying a cardboard box past his living room sermon on responsibility. "There is a 5th clause," Mr. Albright continued, as if he had to keep momentum before anyone could breathe. "It's what we would call a no-contest provision with teeth. Anyone who challenges this will, upon initiating action, triggers the immediate transfer of the 4 cabins to the Novak Land Trust, with the lodge following upon the first adverse filing. That means even if the challenge fails, the cabins would have already transferred to the trust and remained there." Mrs. Novak wanted to make her wishes indelible. "There's no such thing as indelible," my mother murmured, but her voice had gone far away. Mr. Albright folded one page back and tapped a small paperclip bundle. "And there is an attachment D, an affidavit and a recorded statement. She asked that I play it only if necessary." He glanced at me, then at my parents. "I would like to remind everyone present that you may, of course, seek counsel, but if you speak now, you will be speaking on the record of this reading." I felt the shape of grief and gratitude pushing against my ribs. My grandmother had not only seen them, she had anticipated the move. They were already rehearsing. The exact angle of my father's jaw before he said the phrase fiduciary duty, the turn of Clara's pen as she tried to write her way around the word forbid. I was not used to anyone, anywhere, building guardrails for me. People had removed them and told me to learn balance. I realized my hands were clenched in my lap and forced them to loosen. That woman, my father said, and his voice, gentle for the lawyer, but sharp enough for me to recognize the old blade underneath, was not in her right mind near the end. She relied on Liam. He influenced her. This document is suspect. He turned to Mr. Albright with a conciliatory tilt of his head. Of course, we'll be reasonable. We simply need to ensure the best outcome for the asset. It's a lodge, I said before I could stop myself. It's her home. Clara shot me a warning look. Liam, don't make this emotional. Be practical. Do you know what deferred maintenance does to a property like this? Do you know what the market's like? You can't operate on sentiment. She wanted it preserved, I said, my voice shaking a little. She wanted the forest paths maintained and the creek kept clean and the cabins patched, not flipped. She wanted to hear boots on the porch that didn't belong to contractors. My mother let out a soft breath that held too many winters. Enough. We raised you, Liam. Don't forget that. The words landed like a dull bell. My grandmother had once told me that people in pain make smaller rooms for others so they can feel bigger in them. I looked at my mother's hands and remember them packing lunches when I was 8, how she always cut the apple into 8 even slices. I looked at my father and remembered him teaching me to tie a tie for a school dance, how the knot had come out crooked and he laughed. Really laughed, like a different man in a different story. I wanted to say that I hadn't forgotten. I wanted to say that remembering didn't mean obedience. Mr. Albright placed his hand on the paperclip bundle. He had the expression of someone about to set a cup down on a surface he didn't trust. Mrs. Novak asked me to share an additional document if, and only if, her wishes were challenged by specific individuals. He tapped the names with a pen. That would be now. What is it? Clara asked, too fast. A sworn statement and a video file, he replied. In the statement, she describes conversations she had with each of you in the months prior to her death, as well as an incident involving a meeting at Ridge Cafe where the subject of a sale was raised without her consent. She references notes. She references an offer letter from a developer. He stopped. Something else. For the first time since he started reading, I saw a personal reaction slip through his professional frame. Troubled, then resolute. My father sat back like he just realized the chair had arms. We have nothing to hide, he said, and it sounded exactly like a line meant to be heard by a jury. Play whatever you want. My mother's face flickered. Robert, play it, he repeated. He turned to me. If this is a performance, Liam, you won't like the curtain call. The wind outside pushed a fir bough against the window, a soft scrape. Mr. Albright lifted a small drive from an envelope, set it beside his laptop, and hesitated. He looked at me, not at them. Liam, he said. She wanted you to be the one to decide if this is necessary. She believed you'd know. The room went still in a different way, a kind of reverse hush where even sound leaned forward. I saw my grandmother's kitchen the first time I told her I'd gotten the job at the outfitter. She had wiped her hands on a towel and asked me, "Is this good work?" When I said yes, she told me that what we choose to build with our days builds us, too. I reached toward the drive and then stopped short of touching it. My parents were watching me with expressions I couldn't read all the way. Behind them, Clara's pen hovered, waiting to translate the air into strategy. I tried to count my own breaths. 1, 2. The small, familiar ache behind my breastbone eased as if someone had untied a knot. Play it, I said quietly. Mr. Albright nodded once. He slid the drive into his laptop. The screen lit with a simple folder, Novak's statement video. He opened it. A single file appeared with a timestamp from 3 months ago and a title in my grandmother's unsteady typing for when they try to take it. The room inhaled at the same time. My parents, Clara, even me. Mr. Albright clicked. The screen brightened, and then there she was, my grandmother, in her blue sweater with the frayed cuffs, sitting in the lodge's parlor with the stone chimney behind her. She looked straight into the camera with that same steadiness she brought to everything she'd ever survived. She cleared her throat once and started to speak. And in the first sentence, she said 3 names and a date, and the exact amount of an advance she had been pressured to accept, and the location where a document had been slid across a cafe table she had not asked to sit at. And my father, for the first time that morning, reached for a glass of water and missed it. Pause, my mother said suddenly, her voice small but sharp. Pause the video. She looked at me, as if she were looking across a canyon and seeing someone she didn't recognize. Liam, don't do this. I held her gaze. The screen's light washed over all of us. The fire in the parlor behind my grandmother crackled once. Mr. Albright's finger hovered over the space bar, and that's exactly where everything tilted. At the moment when a lifetime of quiet decisions gathered at the threshold of a single louder one, the wind rising in the firs and the mountains pressing closer through the window. As my grandmother's voice, steady and unshakable, continued to name what had happened while my family leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing there was more, much more than any of them had expected. Mr. Albright didn't pause. My grandmother's voice filled the conference room, warm but cutting through the air like a chisel, finding a fault line in stone. On March 12th, Robert and Eleanor brought me to Ridge Cafe under the pretense of taking me for soup, she said, and I could see the steam curling behind her in the video. The old stone hearth, the chair I'd fixed with wood glue last winter. They set a paper before me and told me it was a simple authorization to get the roof work started. I read the first paragraph. It was not about the roof. It was about a sale. She looked directly at the lens and said the number of the offer, the developer's name, the date, and the clause authorizing her son to negotiate on her behalf due to increasing frailty. My father inhaled so sharply the sound startled even him. Clara's pen, which had been sitting poised, dropped an inch and tapped the table twice. My grandmother continued, measured, unhurried. I did not sign it. I asked for time to think. My son grew upset and told me I was being sentimental. My daughter-in-law took the pen and set it in my fingers. She held up her own hands, showing their tremor to the camera with a stubborn pride. They said they were protecting me from myself. I went home without signing. That night, I called Mr. Albright. I asked him to come in the morning. I told him everything. Mr. Albright glanced at me, then back at his notes, the look of someone confirming that a bridge he helped lay was holding. No, my mother whispered, too soft for anyone but the table to hear. She's misremembering. But the video rolled on. My grandmother stated dates, the title of the developer letter. And then her face shifted from firm to almost sad. She said, "This is not a punishment. This is my defense of a place I love, and of a boy who brought me soup and swept snow from my steps while others brought me plans." The video dissolved into her signing the affidavit with steady breath, the notary stamping in the corner. It ended with her leaning forward and saying, "Liam, if you are hearing this, it is because I predicted rain and packed an umbrella." The file stopped. The room's light seemed duller, as if the glow from the laptop had been the only warmth. No one spoke first because no one wanted the responsibility of being that voice. Finally, Clara cleared her throat. "That was moving," she said, picking her words like stepping stones across a stream. "But emotions are not contracts. If anything, it shows Liam had access." She looked at Mr. Albright. "You understand undue influence laws." Mr. Albright folded his hands. "I do. I also understand capacity. We performed 2 evaluations. Both found her sound of mind. We have nurse statements. We have dates of medication. We have witnesses. If you choose to pursue that angle, we will of course present all this." He slid a thin folder a few inches forward, so the tap peaked like a flag from a trench. My father tried again, this time reaching for the thread he always used when rules weren't on his side, tone. "Liam," he said, and his voice softened into that gentle reprimand designed to make you feel ungrateful for breathing. "You're not hearing me. You are not ready for this. It isn't about childhood. It's about scale. $1.9 million is not cottage money. A lodge is a company. Payroll, licensing, insurance, lawsuits. If you fail, you don't just lose a building. You lose a livelihood, and we will have been right to worry." He spread his hands. "Let us help you." My mind was doing that thing where it splits in two. One part of me, the oldest part, the one trained to nod to avoid making a scene, wanted to say I'd think about it, to buy peace. The other part, remembered, plowing the driveway at 5 a.m. alongside my grandmother while our breath made little clouds in the headlamp beams. Remembered her telling me to place my weight over the shovel's handle instead of fighting the drift, to let gravity be my helper. She had turned hard work into technique. She had turned worry into practice. I tasted copper at the back of my mouth and realized my jaw had been clenched for minutes. She already chose, I said, careful to keep my voice even. This wasn't my idea. It was hers. My mother's expression, brittle for so long, finally cracked in a way that made her look briefly like the woman who used to knit on the couch and asked me what book I was reading. Underneath the performance, an ache flickered. She pitted us against each other, my mother said. She always did. She had a way of crowning favorites and then calling it fate. You don't see it because you benefited. That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent years telling myself I was not the sort of person who needed anyone's crown. Hearing that accusation, I felt 12 again, clutching a chess trophy the size of a houseplant while Clara brought home a list of achievements that rustled when you walked past the fridge. I swallowed. I didn't ask for this, I said. I showed up. There's a difference. Enough, Clara said, shaking off whatever had grabbed her for a moment. Strategy. There are angles. If we can't sell, we can create a separate company for services, cleaning, catering, marketing, and bill it. The clause says controlled by us, but we can route through colleagues. We're not breaking rules. We're partnering. She offered the room that corporate smile again, like a business card with all the sharp edges sanded off. Mr. Albright took a breath that sounded like patience being re-wrapped for later. Your mother anticipated that angle as well. The clause defines beneficial interest broadly. Any arrangement that results in a net benefit to you or an entity remunerating you falls under the prohibition. And if you attempt to evade it, the trust activates. I strongly suggest we not treat this like a puzzle to be outsmarted. Clara sat back, lips thinning. My father's eyes shifted to me as if only now recognizing I might not be bluffing. How do you plan to fund this? He asked. Do you know the tax burden on a property like this? The roof, the boiler, the access road. You'll need lines of credit. You'll need guarantees. We have relationships. You do not. Banks are not charities. I had spent weeks after my grandmother passed organizing a pile of documents that smelled faintly of peppermint. And I knew exactly how much oil the ancient boiler drank, the last date the septic was pumped, the invoice from the roofer, the property tax bill with the little note she'd written to herself about the due date. I also knew something my father didn't. My grandmother had been careful and surprisingly modern when it came to paperwork. There's a maintenance account, I said, letting the words land without flourish, and a small endowment. She set them up 3 years ago. It's not endless, but it takes the edge off. I met with the credit union. I have a path. Saying it aloud made my throat go tight again. Pride braided with terror. It felt strange to speak like someone with a plan in front of a man who had only ever told me my plans were daydreams and better shoes. My mother blinked. She did what? Mr. Albright nodded. A dedicated account for repairs and capital expenses, funded from rental income, and a small annuity she purchased when she sold a parcel 20 years ago. Liam has signatory authority. Again she prepared. The line between my father's brows deepened. He pivoted. He always did. Clara, he said without looking at her, the way a foreman talks to the crew. Call Summit Realty. Tell them to send over the management contract template. We'll draft something advisory. If the boy refuses, we file an injunction to prevent waste. We claim he's jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar asset. We can get a temporary order in 48 hours. Mr. Albright said, finally letting the weariness show. If you file anything, attachment C triggers. The cabins move to the trust the moment your action hits the clerk's desk. You will be suing to shrink the estate you claim to protect. My father looked at him the way a frustrated chess player looks at a board that refuses to produce a weak square. Then we'll negotiate. We'll present terms he cannot refuse. I watched the window. A pair of J's bounced between the fir branches like 2 notes on opposite ends of a piano. For a second, the ordinary world pierced the room with the simple fact of itself. I thought of guests who would check in next month with backpacks and warm socks. The couple who returned every anniversary and took the same photo in front of the carved bear by the front steps. The school group that came once a year to learn to snowshoe and left us a card with clumsy signatures shaped like little mountains. The lodge was not a spreadsheet. It was a place where lives brushed against each other and picked up a little of the other's snow. The door clicked. We all turned. In the hallway, 2 soft voices exchanged a few rapid words. And then Mr. Albright's secretary stepped in with an apologetic tilt of her head. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, eyes scanning the tension like a weather report. "But there's a gentleman here insisting. He needs to speak to whoever is responsible for the lodge. He says it cannot wait." My father stood, seeing an opening. "Send him in," he said before Mr. Albright could answer. "We represent the family." The secretary hesitated and then looked at me. Her eyes asked questions. I nodded once. "It's fine," I said. "If it's about the lodge, I should hear it." A man stepped in who didn't look like a developer or a banker. He looked like a local who knows the mountain's moods. Windburned cheeks, clean jacket with a park emblem stitched at the chest, an envelope tucked under his arm. He took in the conference room, my parents' posture, Mr. Albright's neat stack of papers, my hands flat on the table, then rested his gaze on me as if testing a door he hoped would open. "Jessie," I said. "Yes, I'm Jessie from Forest Service," he said. "We've been in touch with Mrs. Novak in the past. I tried to call yesterday, but..." He stopped, glanced toward the folder with my grandmother's name, and recalibrated. "We flagged something on last week's trail inspection down by the south parcel. You got a moment?" He lifted the envelope. On the corner was a map. My father exhaled in irritation. "We're in the middle of legal proceedings," he said. "Whatever it is, it can wait." Jessie shook his head. "It can't," he said simply. "There's a survey marker that moved and a path cut that shouldn't be. It looks like someone started putting stakes in along the creek. Private stakes, not ours." He slid a photo from the envelope. Bright orange flags fluttering in front of a line of alders. "If those are where I think they are, someone's planning to run a road right through the lower meadow." Clara leaned forward despite herself. "A road? Who?" "Not sure yet," Jessie said. "We found tire tracks that don't match usual maintenance. And this." He placed another item on the table, a laminated badge half hidden in dirt. The logo on it made my father's face go still. Summit Corporation. I didn't know the name, but my father did. I could read it in the way his jaw worked once, twice, as if chewing a thought he didn't want to swallow. The badge had a first name and an initial. The same developer my grandmother had named in the video. The same one whose letter she had refused. Mr. Albright swore under his breath in a very careful way that added no heat to the room. "If they've started encroaching," he said, "we can get an emergency order, but we need proof. Photos, GPS, witnesses." Jessie nodded. "I've got some. Not enough for a judge who likes everything in triplicate." He tipped the envelope toward me, but I figure the owner should know before the stakes become gravel. My mother spoke up for the first time in minutes, voice tight. "We had nothing to do with that." It came out fast, unasked, a defense against a charge no one had made explicitly yet. It hung in the air like a foghorn in clear weather. Clara found her footing again. "Jessie, you said you worked with our grandmother in the past," she said, switching to friendly neighbor mode. "You know we all want what's best." Jessie's eyes slid past her to me. "What I know," he said evenly, "is that Mrs. Novak called twice last year about a different neighbor who tried to cut a new path. She was clear about boundaries. She walked them herself." He nodded at me. "You want to walk them now?" My father laughed once, a small, dry sound. "Now," he said. "In the middle of this?" Jessie didn't look at him. "The flags will be gone by tomorrow if the person who set them knows they've been seen." I felt a current move under my ribs. The kind of hard clarity that arrives not with triumph, but with the sense that you are standing exactly where your next step must be. This was not about a contract I could negotiate around a table. This was about the land itself, the creek that threaded the meadow, the little footbridge I'd mended with my grandmother in spring. I stood without realizing I had. "Go," I said. "We," my mother echoed as if the word were a challenge. I looked at Jessie. "I'll go," I corrected. "Mr. Albright, if there's a way to file something today, file it. If there's a form, hand it to me when I get back." To Clara, I hesitated. "I won't stop you from hiring a lawyer. But the first thing I'm doing as the person who now holds the keys is walking those boundary lines." Clara opened her mouth to argue. My father beat her to it. "You're not leaving this room with this unsettled," he said, hand flat on the table, as if he could pin the moment like a paper. "You think you can run out to the woods and play surveyor and that makes you an owner? Sit down." Something in his voice, the old leash hidden in it, tugged out a version of me that always sat. But then I saw my grandmother on the screen again, bones thinner but eyes steady, telling me that some decisions must be made with your feet, not just your head. I reached for the envelope. Jessie slid it toward me. The paper rasped on the wood like a quiet yes. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. "Before you go," he said, "one more thing." He pulled a small, heavy object from a drawer and set it down in front of me. It was a brass key on a fob with an etched number I knew by heart. 3. The safe deposit box at Maple Street Credit Union. My grandmother and I had visited that vault once years ago when she wanted to show me where old letters slept. "She asked me to give you this at the reading," he said. "I was going to hand it over after, but given the developments, I think now is wiser." He hesitated. "She said there are documents in there you would know what to do with if anyone tried to bend the mountain into a straight line." The room seemed to tilt a degree, like a ship turning. My father stared at the key as if it were a piece of metal that could ruin a generation. My mother looked trapped between two versions of herself. One who wanted to stop this, and one who wanted to go home and sit in the quiet for the first time in years. Clara's eyes flickered. Not greed exactly, but calculation, trying to compute what new information might do to the game board. I slipped the key into my pocket. It had a reassuring weight, not heavy like a chain, but heavy like a tool. I looked at my parents one by one. "I'm walking the boundary," I said again, quieter. "You can come if you want, but I'm not asking permission." Jessie nodded toward the door with a half grin that wasn't unkind. "Bring boots," he said. "It's muddy down by the creek." My father pushed his chair back, so suddenly it scraped the floor. "Clara," he said, voice clipped. "Call Summit. Tell them to stand by. Then ring Mr. Thorne at the firm. If he's in court, have him pulled out. We're moving." He turned to Mr. Albright with a look that was almost pity, almost fury. "You may think you've locked this up with clauses and videos, but you underestimate how much muscle the world gives people who refuse to be sidelined." Mr. Albright didn't flinch. "I don't underestimate anything," he said. "I only read what is." I took a breath that tasted like bark and paper and the metal of the key. Jessie held the door. The hallway smelled faintly of toner and rain. Behind me, I heard my mother stand as if a string had pulled her up. "Liam," she said, and the way she said my name made me stop with one hand on the door frame. "You're making a mistake." I turned enough to meet her eyes. For a heartbeat, we were two people in a story neither of us had written, only inherited. "Maybe," I said, "but it will be mine." We stepped into the hall, and the closing door cut the conference room in half like a photograph shuttering. Jessie moved fast, purposeful, the kind of fast that comes from knowing the difference between urgent and loud. Outside, the mountain air shook the tightness out of my lungs. We headed for his truck. He handed me the envelope, and I tucked it under my arm, the corner of the map poking my skin through the jacket as if insisting on being felt. Halfway down the steps, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Jessie paused, reading my hesitation like a trail sign. "Could be important," he said. I answered. "Hello." A calm, unfamiliar voice. "Is this Liam Novak?" "Yes." "This is Summit Corporation," the voice said, polite in that way that filed off fingerprints. "We understand there's been a change in circumstances. We'd like to make you an offer directly for the meadow and creek rights. Expedited, generous, and confidential. If you accept within 24 hours, we can wire a substantial deposit today." I stopped on the second to last step. Wind moved through the firs with a sound like a match being struck. "I don't sell what isn't for sale," I said. The voice smiled without moving a face. "Everything has a price, Liam. Even principles, even nostalgia, especially when those around you are persuasive." My father's voice in the conference room. Clara's pen poised to turn air into contracts. The brass key warm in my pocket. Jessie watching my face with patient attention. My grandmother's recording, steady and unashamed, naming what people had tried to do in the kind of daylight that makes shadows honest. "What exactly?" I asked, and my voice surprised me by how steady it was. "Do you think you're buying?" There was a soft chuckle. "Time, silence, easement. You can keep your little lodge cosplay. We just need a road through the meadow." Past the bridge, I patched with my grandmother while she told me that snowmelt sings a different note every year. I stared at the valley where the creek ran like a thread of glass. No one had the right to smudge. Jesse touched the envelope. "We should go," he said. I lifted the phone again. "I'll give you my answer," I said. "But not on a call." 24 hours, the voice repeated. "After that, we take a different route." The line went dead. I slid the phone into my pocket. We climbed into the truck. The door thunked shut, a kind of answer to the world's suggestion that everything bends with enough pressure. Jesse started the engine. The wipers began a slow rhythm across the windshield as a light rain started to patter, each drop a small percussion on the hood. We turned down the drive toward the south parcel, the trees closing in like an audience leaning forward. The map lay between us on the bench seat, that brass key heavy against my thigh, and somewhere behind us a conference room where my family was deciding whether to become my opponents or my witnesses. As the truck's tires found the gravel, Jesse glanced over. "You know," he said, tone conversational like he was asking about the weather. "If those stakes are where I think they are, they'd have to have permission from the adjacent owner, too. The old Hanson parcel, but Hanson sold last year to a shell company out of state. No listed address." I gripped the envelope a little tighter. "Do you know the company name?" He nodded. "Peak View Holdings." I didn't recognize it, but the way Jesse added almost as an afterthought. We traced a contact number for Peak View once. It forwarded to a landline in town, made my chest fold inward. "Whose?" I asked. Jesse shot me a brief, apologetic look. The caller ID pinged something like Thorn and Low. "Your father mentioned a thorn, didn't he?" The truck rolled on. The rain sharpened, thin as needles, startling in its suddenness. We took the turn where the gravel gives up and becomes dirt, the meadow opening to our right like a held breath. In the distance, bright as a wrong note in a familiar song, a line of orange flags fluttered in a wind that had started to rise. And just as I slid my hand into my pocket to feel the key again, a second phone began to buzz. Not mine this time, but Jesse's, lighting up his dash with a caller ID I couldn't see. He frowned, glanced at it, and then handed me the device without taking his eyes off the rutted road. "You should answer," he said. "It's Mr. Albright." I brought the phone to my ear, the meadow opening, the flag snapping, the creek glinting like a thin blade, and Mr. Albright's voice came through over a hiss of office air. "Liam," he said, "I just opened the sealed letter that came with your grandmother's video. There's something you need to know before you set foot on that meadow. It changes everything about who can and can't put a road there." He paused, the kind of pause that rearranges furniture inside a life. "Your grandmother recorded a deed transferred to you and to someone else. Co-ownership of the south parcel, named by first and middle only to avoid attention. She wrote that the second owner would know when the time came." Mr. Albright's voice in Jesse's truck sounded like the mountain itself was holding its breath. "Liam," he said, "your grandmother transferred the south parcel to you and one other person. She didn't want the name read unless it was necessary. But with those flags out there, it's necessary. The co-owner is Daniel Hayes." Me. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My grandmother had made her lawyer a co-owner of part of the land. But then the pieces began to fall together like stones, finally finding their places in a wall. He'd been more than her lawyer. He'd been her friend for 40 years. He and his wife had shared dinners at the lodge, helped her through winters, and as I now realized, promised her one thing my family never could: protection. By tying him to the land legally, she had ensured someone with both power and loyalty would stand guard if anyone tried to chip away at her wishes. Jesse turned the wheel, guiding the truck closer to the meadow where the orange flags fluttered. "That," he said slowly, "changes the game." It did, because now it wasn't just me, the estranged grandson with limited experience, holding the line against developers and my parents' schemes. It was me and a seasoned lawyer who had spent decades navigating contracts and courts, who had his own skin in the fight. The lodge wasn't standing alone anymore. When we reached the meadow, the rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with wet grass and pine. The flags cut across the earth like wounds. Jesse took photos while I crouched near the creek, running my hand across the damp soil where tire tracks curved too close to the water. The creek whispered as it always had, unbothered but watchful. I thought of my grandmother's words. Sometimes love is proven by who shows up with firewood when the stove goes out. I had shown up. She had made sure I wasn't the only one. That evening back in town, we met at Mr. Albright's office. He laid out the co-ownership deed, stamped and sealed. "This is airtight," he told me. "With me named, Summit can't bully you with threats of inexperience. And if your parents want to file something, they'll have to do it against me too. I've spent my career preparing for people who think pressure is a substitute for principle. It was the first time in my life an adult had looked at me not as someone to scold or rescue, but as a partner. The next morning, we filed an emergency injunction against Summit's encroachment, attaching the photos and Jesse's sworn statement. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, a judge had ordered Summit to cease all activity near the creek until further notice. The orange flags were pulled out, their absence as loud as their presence had been. My parents, furious, tried to push through back channels. Clara drafted proposals for advisory committees, waving them in front of me with that same polished smile. My father hinted at loans, just until you find your footing. My mother tried guilt, sitting across from me at the lodge's kitchen table, saying, "Your grandmother would hate seeing us like this." But here's what she didn't understand. My grandmother had already seen us like this. That's why she had written those clauses. That's why she'd given me the key and given Mr. Albright the deed. Love wasn't blind. It was watchful. The months that followed weren't easy. Running the lodge meant dawn spent fixing heaters, afternoons answering booking emails, nights making sure guests had firewood stacked high enough. But it also meant laughter in the dining hall, the smell of pancakes on winter mornings. Hikers returning with stories of trails that left them breathless. Every time I felt doubt creep in, the creek line where the flags had once stood would remind myself, this place is still whole. Summit eventually pulled out. They couldn't fight the injunction. Not with Mr. Albright holding co-ownership and my grandmother's affidavit making their prior dealings look like vultures circling too soon. The shell company that bought the Hanson parcel dissolved within 6 months. The road project vanished like smoke in the wind. As for my parents, they stopped calling after a while. At first, I thought the silence would ache, but instead it made room for new sounds. The laughter of guests, the crunch of snow under boots, the steady hum of a place alive and unbroken. Clara sent one last email, terse and professional, saying she wished me the best, but hoped I'd reconsider partnership in the future. I didn't reply. Some messages deserved to sit unread. One spring morning, as the meadow bloomed with wildflowers, I found myself sitting on the porch steps where my grandmother and I used to rest after chores. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. Inside the safe deposit box, I had found letters she'd written just for me. Advice, encouragement, and one final reminder. Liam, mountains outlast those who only see them as stone, but they remember those who walk their paths with care. I smiled then, a real one, not forced or defensive. Because she was right. The lodge wasn't just worth $1.9 million. It was worth every moment of struggle it had taken to protect it. It was worth my name, my effort, my future, and it was worth hers. That's how it ended. Not with a sale, not with a fight lost, but with a family's greed turned back by foresight and trust. My parents had walked into that reading, thinking they'd already won. But my grandmother had seen the truth long before they arrived. She had chosen love over image, legacy over greed. And now, every time guests check in, every time I hear boots on the porch at night or laughter echoing through the halls, I know exactly what she meant when she asked if I knew my worth. I know now, and it's measured not in their approval, not in dollar signs, but in every heartbeat this lodge still holds. Untouched, unbroken, and finally truly mine. What would you have done in my shoes, faced with your family trying to dismantle your legacy? Have you ever had to stand up for something you loved against people you were supposed to trust? Tell me what you think. I really want to know your stories in the comments below.